Last week, I got to compare the Mazda CX-50 with the Subaru Outback, and in doing so, I really got to see what's great about the CX-50. So today I'm going to explain in detail what made this stand out, along with its biggest shortcomings and predicted reliability. Before we continue, if you enjoy fun, detailed car content without fluff, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. This would normally be the part where I would explain all that's new, but this is all new. So instead, let me briefly acquaint you with the CX-50. Crucially, think of this as a large CX-30 and not a ruggedized CX-5, because it shares much more in common with the former. However, when it comes to Mazda's lineup, this is going to sit just above the CX-5 in price. It's about 5 inches longer with a lower roofline and more ground clearance than that. The cabin itself really doesn't have any more width, but it has a much wider stance because of these big fender flares with bulges reminiscent to an old Samsung battery. There's also a plethora of available trims. However, like half of them are basically non-existent right now. So the Preferred Plus sitting next to me is actually serving as the entry point. And this one is available at Royal South Mazda in Bloomington, Indiana, the friendly, community-focused dealership that has let me test drive their new, used, and loaner vehicles to make this video possible. If you're in the market, check them out and tell them thanks for me. And lastly, the powertrains in the Mazda CX-50 have been in Mazda's lineup for quite some time now, which I view as a good thing, and that's going to lead me to my first big pro, the engine and transmission. Yes, it is rocking a 6-speed automatic, but it is an in-house engineered transmission built in Japan, and really they don't have any reliability questions. It's a smooth shifting automatic too, especially with the 2.5 liter turbocharged engine, which is the high output CX-50. They actually have a naturally aspirated version too. That's what's in this car. It's going to make 187 horsepower without forced induction, or 227 with the turbo, but 310 pound-feet of torque. And that's on regular gasoline. If you really want to make it rain with premium, you can bump that up to 256. It uses a variable vane turbo that does a phenomenal job at removing lag even at low RPMs. This creates luxury SUV rivaling passing power, response, and refinement without sacrificing too much in gas mileage when compared to the more wheezy standard engine. On regular fuel, I got to 60 in 6.9 seconds with the turbo model. The shifts are still pretty slow from the 6-speed auto. Off the line grunt pretty good. The standard engine allows acceleration that I think most buyers of a mid-size-ish crossover would find acceptable, so long as they aren't trying to impress anyone. It's a very slow shift there. My only critique is that sometimes it hunts for gears, especially at lower speeds, with the naturally aspirated engine. It seems to have a better idea of what it's doing when it's equipped with the turbo, and all of that muscle means that if it's in the wrong gear, you really don't notice it as much. Either way you go, you're getting a dependable and linear feeling powertrain. And just in case you were curious, the whole car itself was actually assembled in a new Alabama plant that's shared between Mazda and Toyota. And the next big reason to pick up the Mazda CX-50, and ultimately the most defining thing of Mazda for a long time, is going to be the handling. It's a fun car to drive, and a lot of that comes down to the very predictable steering that offers a great level of feedback. It has a natural buildup in weight and well-kept body roll, which is thanks in part to a somewhat firm suspension. It's engaging, it feels capable, but if you take it on some really tattered roads, the CX-30-ness starts to shine through the skin. And what I mean by that, it does not have independent rear suspension. If you take it around some harsher roads, you will start to get a jitteriness that just doesn't scream upscale like the rest of the CX-50 does. Although it is worth noting that on most other road surfaces, the CX-50 feels premium with a smooth and confident ride that complements the cabin. And speaking of that, that's the next reason that I would buy a CX-50. It has a classy interior. Yeah, it's not the nicest thing that I've seen from Mazda. There's not super soft materials on even the dashboard like there is in the CX-30. You don't have soft touch where your knees rest like in the CX-5, but the materials feel solid. The look is very elegant and minimalist. Something that's really going away even in luxury cars that are just embracing the biggest touchscreen that they can manage to find. And this too technically has a touchscreen, but it only works if you're in park and we're using Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, which is thankfully wireless in the CX-50. The satisfying control dial does make using the infotainment easier than most touchscreen setups while you're in motion because you literally don't have to lift a finger. However, the oversimplified UI is often convoluted and deserves a thorough rebuild. Mazda continues this analog interior with clicky plastic dials and buttons for the HVAC, a chunky shifter, and a toned down driver display. The CX-50 can also be had with a great Bose sound system with 12 speakers, but if you go with a lower trim, you're still going to have 8 speakers that sound quite nice. I wish it had a little bit more bass, but it's pretty clear. And unlike any other two-row Mazda, you actually have a good back seat. Really, the interior makes this car great for the person that wants a luxury SUV but also doesn't want to look like their personality is Golf. Instead, Mazda was going for more the Pacific Northwest family aesthetic, but this embrace of a rugged nature leads me to my next pro to the CX-50. That's going to be standard all-wheel drive, and really something that's poised to be more of an outdoorsy Mazda. Something that I'm not too used to seeing. Yes, the approach angle is like 18.5 degrees, but the all-wheel drive system has proved to be pretty capable, especially with the standard off-road mode that does a pretty good job of using the brakes to divert torque side to side. It also has a respectable 8.5 inches of ground clearance. The only thing I would advise Mazda to do is maybe build a dedicated off-road trim and not an off-road appearance package like the Meridian. That way they could really give Subaru Wilderness and Outback for their money. That way they could really give Subaru's Wilderness a run for their money. That was a... Ooh. And the last thing that really stood out to me with the CX-50 is kind of a compilation of different things that all allude to a sense of quality and thoughtfulness, whether that's coming from things like that standard all-wheel drive, or the upscale cabin, the connected road feel, the analog controls. It kind of bridges the gap between most of the mainstream models at this price range to true luxury SUVs. I don't think it's gonna fool you into thinking it's the latter there. And lastly, I'm gonna call this a half reason, but the predicted reliability of this thing seems to be pretty good. So, like I've already mentioned, the 2.5 liter and 2.5 liter turbo have been around for quite some time. They've been proven engines, however, not perfect. Last year, 2021, there was definitely some vehicles reporting oil consumption with the turbocharged model. It seems like the issue was valve seals letting oil into the engine, but it also seems pretty confined to that one model year. When it comes to the CX-50's issues in particular, I've heard people say things like a rattle coming from the panoramic sunroof, a finicky auto brake adaptive cruise control system, something that I have heard from other Mazdas in the past, and one person mentioned a weak AC, so time is going to have to tell. I'm sure there'll be other small miscellaneous issues, but overall it's looking pretty good. Additionally, I should mention this because it seems that a lot of people care about this, even though Mazda really hasn't had any issues with it. All of the naturally aspirated versions will have Mazda's cylinder deactivation system, something that other brands have struggled with. Now let's get into its shortcomings. The biggest one for me is that this isn't more like the Mazda CX-5. It has a more jittery ride on bad pavement. It has, again, less soft touch materials in the cabin. The cargo area, while substantially longer, still isn't as tall or wide, actually leading to the CX-5 having more total cargo volume with the seats folded. Plus, in here, it's just a 60-40 split, but in the CX-5, you have a 40-20-40. And to top it all off, this is more expensive than the CX-5. Again, this has a different appeal, but I can't help but think that there's a little bit more potential here with the CX-50. Additionally, when comparing to vehicles like the Subaru Outback, this is going to be a lot more noisy. It won't be as comfortable on bad roads either, making this honestly remind me more of a Subaru Forester or Toyota RAV4 than an Outback or Venza. And to continue, I think that the user interface needs a overhaul. The seats are middling and the visibility is just okay. It kind of leads to the cabin feeling a little bit smaller than it really is. But overall, I am a fan of the CX-50. It brings Mazda's reputation for building a fun, upscale, dependable ride into the crossover segment, but this time with a more rugged personality and a better back seat. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video to help me push through the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe and hit the bell for more, and thank you to my loyal patrons for your continuing support. I'll catch you in the next one.